University campuses are changing, and globally there's more competition for students and academic staff alike. Students also have higher expectations from their campuses. Surveys show that university campus facilities can be a deciding factor in where students decide to study. But more importantly, universities have their own roads, shops, sports facilities, restaurants, residential units, you name it. So in essence, these communities are mini cities, and they're frequented by thousands of people every day. Now these mini communities are transforming into smarter university campuses, and they're setting ambitious goals to reduce their carbon footprint. Welcome to the Urban Café. My name is Tamara Hamdan, and today we'll be discussing why it's important to transform university campuses into mini smart cities. Joining me today for the Urban Café are Trevor Payne, Director of Estates at the University of Birmingham, where he focuses on how large universities need to embrace the future cities agenda. We also have Professor Phil Taylor, the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research and Enterprise at the University of Bristol, where he is responsible for the continuing development and leadership of the university's research strategy. We also have Paul Beasley, the Head of Research and Development at Siemens in the UK. Paul is based in Oxford, and he manages and develops the internal and external innovation networks across the country for Siemens. We also have Richard Dicani, Director and Global Cities Planning and Design Leader at Arup, where he helps towns and cities plan for better districts and transport networks. I hope you have a freshly brewed cup of coffee or tea with you, and let's get right into it. So, Paul, before we get into the imperative for smart campuses, can we start by explaining what a smart campus actually is?
Okay, so a smart campus, I mean, kind of varies from university to university, depending on kind of what the strategic focus is. But essentially, it kind of utilizes information kind of collected from the assets around the campus in order to make data-driven decisions.
Great. And Trevor, you've partnered with Siemens to create the smartest university campus in the world. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you've decided to pursue this project and what do you aim to achieve with it?
Sure, yeah. So we're challenged anyway to invest in the campus. We've got a fantastic campus, over 200 buildings of various different ages. So we need to invest to upgrade some of our building stock. We also need to digitalize at the same time. And we're all challenged with getting to net carbon zero. So if you bring those three challenges together, actually, if you can combine all of that, you really start to push some of the benefits of smart around intelligence and data and digitalization.
And Paul, Trevor, can you elaborate on how these kind of collaborations can actually benefit the universities themselves?
I think really, of course, kind of utilizing the data to optimize the way in which the buildings are used, kind of via energy, via utilization. But I think certainly it opens up greater opportunities for the university as well to do research. Actually, having kind of real data is a good way to actually leverage some kind of funding.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Trevor?
Yeah, I think there's a reality that there's a huge amount that we need to do here, and I think the best way to do this is with partners. So I think some of the benefits we get in this partnering approach is access to specialist knowledge, access to wider networks and ideas and thoughts. Importantly, access to grants and funding, and that's going to be increasingly important, but also access to technology and ability.
Phil, what can we learn from smart university campuses? How can we apply what we learned there to cities in general? What can we do to make sure that we are contributing to technology with purpose?
Yeah, I think absolutely they can. I think that a few years ago, people thought that, well, maybe a university campus is a very special case that can't be generalized very easily and rolled out across a city. But I think that we're seeing that that's not true, and that actually university campuses are becoming more and more complex ecosystems anyway. The much more porous boundaries between industry, civil society, local government, and the university, which means that if you can make things work on a university campus, then actually you should be able to scale that out and roll it out across a city. I think most cities are made up of reasonably easily identifiable regions, all with their own different set of assets, culture, in mix of industry, commercial, education. And I think as long as you can take the lessons from your university campus and see what the necessary ingredients are, you can then roll that out.
And Richard, how do you see this in terms of the wider community, city infrastructure? You work with towns, with city districts and other urban environments. How do you see that contributing to the wider community?
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. And I think it's really important that we don't think about university campuses in isolation, because often they have been planned as quite distinctive, kind of almost remote areas of cities, often on the edge or in a very defined area, often living in their own kind of little bubble potentially. So it's really important that all of the kind of great creative, innovative things happening in campuses are part of the city. That means they need to be connected and accessible and visible and also approachable to people as well. So I think there's a real opportunity to make these campuses of the city and starting to think about what the opportunities are to kind of break down those barriers, whether they're physical connections, whether they're digital connections, or perhaps more psychological kind of perceived kind of barriers that exist. So we can create this kind of ecosystem where the campus is the catalyst for really positive change. And through this kind of network of relationships across the city, the benefits of that spread much further and much wider.
So could we actually say that smart campuses could drive new business models? Is that something that we're already seeing? Maybe, Paul, we can kick it off with you.
Yeah, I think there's kind of great opportunity. Obviously, you have quite a large data set in order to actually kind of play with. So they're kind of fairly representative. So you can actually test kind of things at scale. Which is kind of great opportunity to actually do that rather than kind of launching kind of products into the marketplace kind of with not so much kind of testing. But there are kind of great opportunities to do this, looking at optimizing kind of building systems, heating systems. I mean, we had some interesting kind of social interactions. Kind of projects talking to a university where they were looking into a hackathon where they could actually take kind of data from their timetables and kind of merge that with the assets around the campus.
Trevor, do you see that already at the University of Birmingham?
Yeah, I mean, going to the smart city point, I mean, we're a large campus in the centre of Birmingham, 200 buildings of various ages and conditions. We've got all of the amenities that a city would have, multi-storey car parks, theatres, libraries, sports centres, production areas, research areas, classrooms. So actually, we're able to test a whole load of technologies and thoughts in a fairly safe way that benefits us, but it also benefits the thinking around smart and what does smart mean and what can smart deliver. The other big benefit for us as well is our next door neighbour is one of the largest hospitals in Europe as well. So we're sort of poised on the diving board to start to think about smart health. So when you really start to think about smart cities, of course, smart campus is something that I'm focused on at the moment.
So just like other city infrastructure, smart campuses create so much data. Phil, let me ask you this. How can we make sure that we use that data effectively so that we use the space more efficiently, perhaps adjust planning, and also create a better student experience?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there, I guess. think the thing is, it's becoming easier and easier and lower cost to collect data now. So I think there's not really a major problem in collecting data. We can look at data from within the buildings about occupancy, about carbon monoxide levels, about temperature. We can look at flows of people around the city. We can look at social media streams and pick up where there are particular clusters of conversations going on. And that allows us to potentially draw some insights from that. But I think that's where the challenge is now. It's not collecting the data, it's cleaning the data, understanding the data, synthesizing different data streams that maybe have been collected by different individuals, and trying to turn that into actionable insights that you can actually then do something for the benefit of society, the environment, the economy, people in a city. It's clear that we could integrate healthcare, we could integrate the transport system, we could signal to people that air quality is particularly poor at the moment in one part of the city. We could signal that would allow people to maybe walk a slightly different route to school or to work, and do that for their own for the benefits of their health. We could signal around flooding. There might be some localized flooding. We can help get those signals out there quicker and give us a smarter, more responsive city.
Trevor, that contributes to space efficiency as well, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key deliverables that we'll get from partnering with Siemens is the installation of an enlightened system, which basically sees about 60,000 smart sensors rolled out across the campus. And these have all got the processing power of an iPhone. And, they can collect many, many things. But from a space perspective, what it'll enable us to do is to understand how rooms are being used, to look at the timetabling system, and to make sure that habit and practice say the same thing. So we've got a lot of poor booking practice at the moment around space. We need to make sure people are booking the right room for the right numbers, using it in the right way, and are actually showing up, because then we can be proactive. That way we only clean rooms that have been used, we only maintain rooms that need to be maintained. So we start to drive efficiency as well.
We've had some very interesting collaborations and hackathons with other universities where we've asked the students to optimize the kind of meeting room energy, and they've come up with some really interesting kind of scenarios where they're kind of turning off the heating, and kind of waiting for the next lecture to come along, turning it on 10 minutes beforehand, and of course 10 minutes kind of before the lecture finishes. It's kind of really interesting to see the kind of the thought process and how these things can actually factor in, and just those little teeny changes kind of year on year when we run the hackathons, how they start to try and kind of trim those margins kind of further, and of course test it on themselves.
I really agree with the discussion about data is incredibly helpful, but it's useless unless you get the insight from it, and it's the insight that enables you to drive a positive outcome. So, if you start from what's the outcome you want to achieve from this, whether it's energy efficiency or kind of optimization of assets or reduced journey times or whatever it is, then working back from that outcome, how can you use data and insights to help kind of improve against that outcome? But I also think there's something really interesting around, the role that universities can play more broadly in cities around data, because cities are full of data, and often we talk about now as, the data being the solution to all the problems that cities have around urban congestion, air quality, access to health and services, and all those kind of things. But often the data is sitting in multiple hands, so there's no single kind of ownership of that data that's the kind of guiding mind that brings it together, that collates it in a safe, kind of trustworthy environment. So the idea that a city could create a data trust, that people put their data, including the private sector, puts their, might be commercially sensitive data, but having some kind of ownership and leadership of that, and maybe universities can play a role in providing that kind of ownership and leadership on behalf of the city, because they're working towards using the data for positive outcomes. So thinking more broadly about how you can take that kind of campus-based model and deploy it at scale to a whole city, and then look at that kind of citywide data to get maximum benefit from the insights that flow from it.
To add to that, I think Siemens have demonstrated that actually you've got a product that will do that in in MindSphere and the work that you've done at Dubai Expo, because basically what you've got is a pop-up city, or a city that's there for a certain amount of time, then it will completely change. But what you've done is locked into the infrastructure at many levels with different systems and different data points. So it demonstrates it can be done. But I think it's a cultural shift that needs to go with that as well, because it raises all sorts of questions about privacy, ownership of data, sharing, competitive advantage. So in some respects, the technology bit is probably the more straightforward thing to put in place. It's how do you manage the agreements around that?
We've seen many studies lately about how smart buildings can improve the well-being of the people that occupy them and use them on a daily basis. Trevor, can you tell us a bit more about how smarter campuses have enhanced the student experience, especially when it comes to the learning experience?
Yeah, sure. There's probably two things I can say on that. So one thing that we're really keen to do is to use data and smart to look at student well-being, so we can start to get learner analytics, so that we can be much quicker at identifying if people aren't turning up to lectures, or if people are struggling with downloading their work, or that, you know, we can use the data in the system to pinpoint those early conversations. So before it becomes a big problem, we can jump on it and be a lot more supportive. The other thing is, if I'd have had a smart campus as we went into COVID, it would have made my life so much easier from an operational perspective, in terms of knowing who's in the building, you know, how do I space, how many people are in the building, how do I space it, how do I link it to the ventilation rates, how do I measure air quality? So those sorts of things are now becoming expectations. I mean, smart is sort of driving a whole load of experience-driven expectations, and people have choices, and if we don't jump on it and provide it, people will go elsewhere. So I think
we see that universities can also be thought leaders, especially within the context of their communities. But do you think there's more interest in creating living labs and those sort of collaborations also across other city infrastructure?
Yes, I mean, I think there already is huge interest in learning from these living labs and university campuses. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that the more that university campuses become complex and more porous and heterogeneous in their makeup, the more valuable they are to learn from for other applications. I worked with Paul here on the Helix campus in Newcastle, and I'm now the lead for the Temple Quarter Enterprise campus at the University of Bristol. And I've seen that in effect in a number of ways, that we've trialed things on a university campus, learned from it, and then been able to roll that out to other application areas. You know, we've talked a lot about technology so far here. I think we've hinted at it, but what's really important as well is taking a socio-technical approach to this and making sure we embed stakeholders right at the very start to frame the challenges, to shape the technical solutions. Otherwise, I think potentially you don't see all the benefits, and you can have some unintended consequences as well.
Right. And Trevor, the University of Birmingham embarked on a really ambitious project. You're trying to create the smartest university campus in the world. Can you walk us through that project, why you've decided to embark on this journey, and what do you aim to achieve with it?
Yeah, so what the Dubai campus has enabled us to do is to start with a clean sheet of paper. So for us, it's been fantastic to design smart in from the get-go, because the big challenge we've got in Birmingham is it's an existing campus. So anything we do from this point onwards is retrofit. So I think this is going to be a huge challenge in terms of technology, because we can't purely focus on technology that has to be built into a new building. You know, 80% of the buildings we've got are going to be buildings we're going to have by 2050. So if we look to the carbon challenge, it's about adapting and changing buildings that we've got. So already we're reaching out into the city, and we're doing a lot of work. It was mentioned earlier on in the conversation. We're looking at transport, and we're looking at wayfinding, and how do people get from the city centre to the university and backwards? How do we manage visitors? How do we give them information that's real time and meaningful, that, you know, when they turn up, they go to the right car park rather than hunting around for spaces? All of those sorts of things, I think, really support this experience-driven push that I think is one of the big benefits of this whole smart approach.
And Richard, do you see a similar trend in terms of creating living labs across other urban infrastructure, across cities, towns?
Yeah, I think yes, I think, Phil mentioned some of the other examples like airports, like transportation hubs, often like King's Cross in London, which is at the heart of a sort of major knowledge quarter innovation district, where you're bringing all of those assets together, the transportation, the kind of academic assets, the research assets, the business assets, where all these things can come together. I think all of that is fantastic. I think there's lots of opportunities for that in cities, but historically that tends to be concentrated on the larger cities, the more affluent cities. I think the challenge that we have in the UK going forward is how do you create that similar effect in smaller cities and larger towns, particularly those that are suffering in terms of deprivation, the government's focus on levelling up, and how can you take a perhaps smaller university and think about you can build those relationships with other partners to create similar kind of catalytic effects in places that haven't had that or haven't had that attention over recent years. So I think it's a real great opportunity, but how scalable is it sort of downwards as well as upwards? And how can we deploy it to some of the places that haven't had that kind of innovation culture necessarily? And how do we sort of help grow that?
Now, if I can ask each one of you to share their opinion, looking into the future, 5 years from now, what could smart campuses look like?
Yeah, I think the kind of smart campuses or kind of living labs are kind of really exciting innovation environment. To not just to help kind of develop technologies and kind of support the optimization of universities, but actually bring kind of parties together, industry, university, in order to collaborate there, kind of share kind of knowledge and accelerate some of these fantastic technologies that are being developed to the market. And in doing so, depending on obviously the speciality that the university is focusing on, you're developing the skills for the future, kind of, and the local community ecosystem.
Fantastic. Phil, what about you? How do you see this space evolving?
Yeah, I'm always quite reluctant to get involved in predictions, but let's see. I mean, a few thoughts is, I guess I'd like to see smart campuses become very open, accessible, exciting places. I think from a university perspective, I'd like these campuses to really assist universities in showing society what they're good for, not just what they're good at. I think that's very useful. And I think if we get the smart campuses right, that will become a lot more visible. Clearly, I think we want them to be engines of prosperity, inclusion, and also environmental sustainability.
Thank you for your honesty. Trevor, what about you?
Well, I would hope that the Living Lab approach that we're taking in Birmingham will enable us to have an evidence-based approach. So we'll have tried and tested stuff out in Dubai, which we can then bring to Birmingham, some of the new startup technology that Paul mentioned. But hopefully what I'm really sort of looking for a smart campus of the future is an experience-driven campus, one that's supportive of everything that goes on.
Great. And Richard, last but not least, any thoughts on how this space is going to evolve?
Yeah, I think it would be really great to see the sort of evolution from sort of test bed to a sort of much wider catalyst for change across the city. So drawing on that sort of convening power that I think that Phil mentioned, but also that sort of knowledge capacity to have a much wider impact across a larger part of the city. So you actually find it difficult to know when you're in the smart campus or not, because the kind of boundaries and the delineation between campus life and rest of city life have all become a little bit more blurred and kind of interconnected and integrated.
It is evident that to create the smart campus of the future, we need innovative technologies and digitalization. These technologies will enhance the student experience, create new research opportunities, help us derive value from data while significantly reducing our carbon footprint. Let's watch this space.